in support of the recently published book, Ancient Navigators. This series entitled 7 Firm Reasons Why We Have Not Found Atlantis Yet has been created. Each video will address a crucial element in the search for Atlantis and will continue in line with the main theories contained within the book. We could begin with the first major point to be made: the misinterpreted calendar and distance units. When one brings up Atlantis in conversations concerning the development of human history, a great debate then ultimately unfolds. The famous ancient Greek philosopher Plato was the very first to write of Atlantis, sparking a search that has endured for much of our written history. The thought process goes as follows. If the date Plato gives us are correct, then Atlantis must be the very first advanced civilization. Those that promote this idea simply like to ignore that half of the Atlantis story involves the ancient Athenians of Greece, who Atlantis were said to have waged a great war against. They too must then have existed, and the theory of Atlantis as the predecessor of later civilizations begins to lose its unreasonable romance. That ideology is then able to be replaced with well-grounded searches for an amazing lost civilization. Through Plato's Timaeus and Critias dialogues, the date given for Atlantis comes from the priests of the temple of Sais, Egypt. This was later transferred into Greek by the influential Athenian Solon, who receives the information from the records in person. This date then calculates to roughly 9,600 BC in our current calendar, once the years Solon had historically lived in are factored in. Such a detailed story from reputable historical figures such as Plato and Solon must have had elements of truth to it. This is particularly relevant as the account states not once but twice that it is in fact a true history. In this account, there are 2 units of measurement that have been transmitted incorrectly. The first is in the form of the calendar year stated, and the second being the units of distance measured in the Atlantis account. The calendar can easily be resolved by using the moon's lunar phase of 29.5 days to get the yearly calendar dates. Many early historical calendars and observations had used the moon rather than the sun, and it is likely that this was the source of the mix-up that has for so long plagued Atlantis. This correction to lunar cycles would bring the Atlantis era to a date corresponding to roughly 1300 BC plus or minus the rounding of years in the story. This revised date now matches perfectly within the Mediterranean Bronze Age. It also lines up perfectly with the Mycenaean Greeks of Athens, whom Atlantis was said to have fought. Often completely ignored in Atlantis books and documentaries, there are surviving records of the ancient kings of Athens that Plato claims were part of the Atlantis story. These kings and the years of their reigns are within the late Bronze Age according to the records, and not rather in the Neolithic period more than 10,000 years ago. The date of this lost civilization also only applies to the great war fought with Athens, and not to the beginning nor the end of the Atlantean culture. It is stated rather vaguely that at a time afterwards, the whole of Atlantis was sunk beneath the waves. The second issue of measurement concerns the units of distance measured in the Atlantis account. Having to find perfect equivalents in each ancient language for names and units would have been challenging back in Solon's time. The general units given in the story are stadia, which are accepted by historians to have been equal to 185 meters. If the Greek unit of measurement just one size smaller was applied, in the plethron, instead of the stadia, the plain, the capital city, and all of the other details in the story of Atlantis not only become reasonable, but they actually become quite likely for a well-organized late Bronze Age civilization. One good example to expand on this is the measurement in the dialogues claim that the width of the horse racing track built for the Atlantean capital was 1 full stadia of 185 meters. There would be no practical reason to have this track this wide at any time in history, then or now. Once the plethron is applied, we have a width comparable to the great Circus Maximus racetrack built in ancient Rome. The magnificent Atlantis capital, with all of its canals, ships, temples, would then ultimately have measured nearly 1 kilometer across, and would have still been extremely impressive, especially for its time. In order to discover Atlantis, it is essential to address the issue that the math has been incorrectly passed down to us. Once corrected, we could begin to properly look for this lost empire and place it in the grand context of our human past.